Okay, so I think we're going to kick off. As a lot of people have joined spot on time. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Keith Robson. I'm a board member of London HR Connection, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to today's webinar, Boosting the Employee Proposition on a Budget, which will be facilitated by Matt Norbury from Each Person. Before we get into the content of the webinar, just a couple of things I wanted to highlight. First of all, I want to extend a particularly warm welcome to anyone who's joining the webinar for the first time. LHRC would usually run these sessions face-to-face, but of course, for the past couple of years, we've been unable to do so. So the webinar format it has been, and we're continuing to do that now through until June, when we're hoping to have our first face-to-face, but more on that to follow. I will hand over to Matt in a second, who's going to introduce the panel to you before jumping into some introductory slides. But just to highlight the fact that this webinar is being recorded, so if you do have an issue with that, now is the time to drop off. I particularly want to, at the very end, alert you to a couple of webinars coming up that LHRC are running in March, and I'll give you a little bit more detail about that once the webinar is finished. But in the meantime, let me hand over to Matt Norbury and enjoy the next hour. Matt, over to you.
Thanks, Keith, and thanks to everyone who's joined the talk. To kick off, I'm going to briefly introduce three amazing panelists that I've got joining me to discuss the employee proposition. First, we have Lindsay, who's in the HR team of Sykes, who are a global leader in outsourcing and an existing Each Person client. Hi, Lindsay.
Hi, everyone.
Next, we have Chris, an expert in all things finance as a chartered accountant and finance director.
Hi guys, I wouldn't go that far, but thanks, Matt. Yeah.
And finally, Wendy, a renowned psychologist, widely consulted across national media as an authority in all things mental health. Hi, Wendy.
Hello.
And finally, myself, not in the same league as my panelists. I'm the founder of Each Person. We're a technology company. We've raised about 20 million funding so far, and we focus very much on recognition and reward solutions. We work with UK employers, but we are just rolling out across Europe as well. So that's just a little bit about who we are. We're here today to get the thoughts of the panel, and really it's an open conversation, but there are a few slides that we'll just quickly cover off to set the scene. I won't read the stats, but what the research says is that there is a big money problem out there, a financial crisis that is affecting the majority of employees. And that in turn is creating a real pressure and stress that people are dealing with that's negatively affecting their performance at work. So when we look at the employee proposition and what employers can do on a limited budget, we really need to look at the reality of the lives that employees are leading. Denise, if you can go to the next slide. A common misconception, though, of I suppose of COVID is that COVID has caused a lot of this financial problems that people are under. It's not true. Now, COVID's been a catalyst and it's accelerated things, but if you look at that top slide, that predates the pandemic. So what we're talking about here is the financial health of UK employees, people in employment just isn't good enough. And there's a growing need, in fact, expectation for employers to do more and to help solve the problem. Next slide.
Just to pick up a point there from Matt, I absolutely agree that the problem with financial stress is something that nobody ever talks about. We talk about stress, we talk about symptoms of stress. Finances and money are something that us in the UK are just not very open to talking about. It's the thing that we like to sweep under the carpet. So it's always been there, but I think post-COVID, there's some really interesting stats that are coming out. And when we actually look at the data, and I've pulled all this off ONS, so it's not biased in any way, hopefully. we can see a real shift in stats. So at the end of 2020, stress causes things like anxiety, low mood. We're seeing a 50% increase in high levels of anxiety. That's anxiety and stress that's scored at between 6 and 10 out of 10. And that's versus only 20% in 2019. So you can see that it's more than double. And also the other thing, looking at low mood and depression, which is of course another symptom of stress, we're looking at life satisfaction moving from less, it's always about less than 10%. In 2019, it was at 8%. And this time in 2020, the latest measure is at 20%. And so the other things to look at are the components of stress. And when we look at that, the most concerning points for people, their stress pressure points, have changed dramatically. It's always the top one is workplace stress. The second one is relationship stress. And the third one's often health stress. It does change a little bit lower down. But this year, for the first time, the second one is financial pressure. And I think that correlates with the stats we're seeing about mental health stuff increasing. Can we go to the next slide, Denise, please? Sorry. So everybody knows, particularly in HR, about stress and the impact on well-being and performance. And these latest stats are painting a different picture. Everything's slightly altered. And I'm a big advocate of saying that it's not enough to sort of tickle around the edges, talking about stress and resilience. We talk about resilience as being the opposite to stress. And I don't know about you, but my experience of people dealing with the stress problem is talking about exercise and going outside and mindfulness. And I don't think that's enough. I think if financial pressure is really hotting up, we need to target it and talk about it as an actual problem, and also about the things that it creates. The other really interesting stat that I've just pulled up post-COVID is about what we call coping mechanisms. And a big coping mechanism is substance abuse, particularly alcohol. And that's increased generally across the board by 10% over the last couple of years. And a stat that I think is just out today, I've pulled it off and written it down somewhere, alcohol-related deaths in 2020 were up by 16%. That's absolutely huge. When you look at the start of the stats, which was 2000, when you look at the increase, that's a huge increase. And these are all the things that are coming out, and it's all stress related. Denise, can I get you to push the next slide, please? And so just to sort of pull it together, these stats are really driving home this message about financial well-being and problem solving, and not just talking about the symptoms of it, but actually getting to the root cause. And this, for me, the stats are really highlighting. And it's not just talking about financial stress, but talking about solutions. We're really great in the UK about talking about symptoms and what to look out for and top 10 of this and top 10 of that, but talking about how people can deal with it, how people can actually solve those problems, and talking about the financial resilience, not just stress resilience.
Thanks, Wendy. It's really useful. So, I mean, the stats tell a story, and they paint a pretty dire picture, really, of the financial situation that many people who are in active employment are in. I'm now going to throw this out to the rest of the panel. And Chris, I'll start with you, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Why do you think so many people in the UK struggle financially, even though they are in employment?
It's a good question. I think generally it comes. It starts with education, really. We certainly in my schooling, we were taught many things through school, college, university, but never really financial literacy. So I think what tends to happen is that you kind of leave school, uni, you get your first job, you get introduced to your first credit card, so you get excited, and that gets maxed. Which comes with obviously hideous interest rates. There will be something that will come up, an urgent payment that needs to be made, and so that's going to be more really expensive debt you get into. So I think it really starts with education, really.
Okay, no, great. Well, I mean, coming back to something you said, Wendy, about people not talking about the financial situation, it sort of hit a chord with me. I was recently with an MD, one of our clients, and they were talking about an employee who'd worked for them for years. They're a really big employer. This person had worked in the company for years, on and off, part-time and full-time. And she was telling this story about that one day they actually discovered this person was homeless and they didn't know. And this lady had been coming to work and doing a job. And the only reason they discovered it was actually the state of the uniform sort of had fallen away a bit. And it turned out that she got into such financial difficulty through a combination of things you can't avoid, unexpected realities, cropping up, but also just not talking about it. And it totally shocked them because this person had been in the business for so long and obviously suffered in silence. And I think, yeah, I agree with you, Chris, there's an education piece, but also it's people's openness and willingness to want to talk about it, because I think there is a certain stigma that maybe sits with people when they're in financial problems, or at least they perceive them to be. Do you agree with that, Wendy?
Yeah, absolutely. The main coping strategy, apart from sort of diversive tactics, is about avoidance. And so the stories I often hear from face-to-face clients, I've got one guy running his own business who every time his bills pile up, he just puts them in the shredder. And it's very therapeutic for him to shred those bills and just ignores them till all the demands come in. And other people, from a personal perspective now, with household bills, doubling, electric bills, gas bills, all of that sort of stuff, people just get them, know what they are, and shove them in a drawer. So it's just total avoidance. And that's people's favourite coping strategy when things start to get up. The stress sort of piles up and they just want to pretend it's not there.
Absolutely. No, we as in our platform, we added something called the Wellbeing Hub, and we've not really highlighted it at all as a feature, but one of the most popular aspects is the financial news and financial information section. So I do think there is an appetite for people to want to get a more control and a better handle on this. Lindsay, from an employer's perspective, I mean, what experience have you had? What insight do you get visibility-wise? If we come back to the MD of one of our other clients who had no clue the struggles that people were going through, or this particular person, from a site's perspective, how much visibility do you have? What insight can you share?
Yeah, well, similar to what Wendy had said, there's a lot of denial. They won't talk about it. They won't talk to their line manager about it. So we do have an employee assistance programme that's completely confidential, that they can speak to and reach out there for help, which has been very, very successful. But it goes just back to exactly what Wendy said. They just don't want and aren't comfortable talking about it at all. And it's only when the line manager perhaps sees a little dip in performance or behaviours that they've never ever seen from the employee before that starts to raise alarm bells, as the employer wants to look after the employee. So the employee assistance programme has been a big push for us, especially these past 2 years, and we have seen some success stories come from that.
Excellent. And I mean, obviously EAP costs money. I'm assuming in terms of your overall budget, that's a justifiable expense.
Yeah.
Seems like it adds a lot of value. How do you go about making employees aware that it exists?
We have a communications and engagement manager within our company, and we promote that all year round, all the time. I think there's Mental Health Awareness Week. Recently there was Child's Mental Health Awareness Week. So we use opportunities, platforms for things like that. There is on each person the wellbeing unit, and we can send out, even e-cards through each person. Great job. Well done on whatever it is they've succeeded on, but there is also that wellbeing support there for them if they need it.
Absolutely. And that raises a question, Wendy, from a psychological point of view. How much do you think positive reinforcement, whether that's recognizing someone's behaviors, giving them something, how much of that do you think can help, I suppose, grab, because there is this battle going on people have got, because when you've got financial difficulties that you become really either, all consuming really, is there things that you can be doing outside of extra financial support that you think can potentially retip the balance and get people back on track?
A lot of struggles with mental health, financial pressure, stress, people perceive it as being a weakness. So they're most unlikely at work to talk about it. So although there's a huge stigma about talking about finances in the UK, particularly at work, people will be even more unwilling to talk about it. And I think that it's about having an open conversation, communicating about stuff, destigmatizing it, and building people's confidence. It's like you were saying about positive recognition. That is going to build people's confidence to a point where you develop a rapport, develop their confidence. And at that point, people are more likely to talk about what's really going on and what they're struggling with.
Absolutely. And just a quick question, there was a question in the chat from Mary, and I'll pick this one, Mary, if that's okay. So the question was, by what means do you encourage people to use the EAP and reach out? Because, you know, in this example, you know, calls to EAP pretty much zero. What we've seen, and Lindsay, I don't know if you'll confirm this or not, what we've seen works is about how and where you integrate things like EAP. So having an EAP somewhere on an intranet is fine, but then people's likelihood of going to seek it out, I think, is much lower. If you can bring that into other areas of the employee experience that they actually frequent, and that could be embedding it into some extra, you know, news or information, or it could be near where they have to go regularly to get their pay slips, or wherever it might be. If you can make these things much more visible, then actually you're more likely to hit someone at that moment in time where they really need it, and, you know, then they see it, they can reach out. Whereas I think the more separated things are, the harder it is to get traction to things like EAP. That's from our experience. I mean, Lindsay, you said you've had good success with it. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I totally agree, Matt. As I touched on earlier, we have a communications and engagement manager, and we have various communications that they send out, and it's not just communications about EAP. You know, if we're doing let's just say competitions or events, or there's something going on in the business that we want to highlight, we have communications that go out, and we also remind staff that it's there, so that it's not just going out as a single standalone advert for EAP. You know, combine it with other events that are going on, other things that the business is working on. We do have an intranet that our staff have access to, and as you say, we can do the ticker tape along the intranet just to highlight it again. We use our intranet to get our pay slips, so we're all in there at least once a month. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, and from our perspective, we will always encourage to do single sign-on integration with the HR system or with the intranet. So again, the more you can bring things together, the more likely it is you're going to end up with more of a coherent, you know, overall employee experience. And we've obviously talked about the problem, and it seems obviously like it's a huge challenge for many people. Let's talk solutions now. Chris, what would you recommend for employees? I mean, is there any advice you could give, you know, from your accounting background, from your finance background, to the employers could then share with their people around better protecting themselves financially? You know, are there things that just most employees aren't aware of that are out there that could help them, even if it's in small steps? Because, you know, it is about taking those small steps to get maybe some more healthy habits established.
I think that's now on head, healthy habits. It's obvious, but people don't tend to do it. It's having that that discipline to put a percentage of your salary away each month. You know, I think so many people live to their means. Even if they were to you know, get a pay rise, they tend to increase their means as opposed to seeing that as added money and maybe putting that aside. But just having that discipline to say 5% every time I get paid, 5% is going to be a standing order. You know, put it in an ISA. You know, I know interest rates aren't amazing at the moment since the 08 crash, but having that discipline to have a portion of your salary going into a kind of a nest egg or a emergency account if something goes wrong, I think will mentally help employees as well.
Absolutely, and I mean it's very in line with what we've done. So what we added to the platform 3 or 4 months ago was for the ability for employees to link their salary into a savings pot. So it was this idea that automatically every month an amount of money could go into this savings scheme, whatever you want to call it, because you might be building up for Christmas, or you might be just having a financial cushion in reserve for you to then be able to access when you need. Crucially, that you mentioned the low interest, to make it a no-brainer, we give 6% interest on that saving. So we're really trying to do everything we can as a provider to be better than best value, to help encourage people to put money aside and just develop those better financial habits. It's funny you say, even if people get a pay rise, they spend it. I'm probably a similar sort of bracket. You do spend what you get, what you earn. The stat I read recently was that over a quarter of high income earners spend beyond their means. So I think, again, there's this preconception when you talk about financial pressures that employees are under. Certain employers might say to themselves, well, actually, we pay really high salaries, so we're probably immune to this problem. Well, over a quarter of high earners, I think that classification was over 100 grand a year or 150 grand a year, they're in the same boat. And I think probably, Wendy, to your point, the denial is probably even greater in the higher income bracket than it will be in other brackets.
Yeah, very much so. A lot of people will say to me, oh, it's all right for the private practice clients I've got, they're all high net worth individuals. They all suffer just as much. Disposable income is relative. They all spend up to whatever they're earning. It's exactly the same.
Absolutely. And we just got a message in from Nikki about partnering with organizations like GoHenry that teach financial management to kids. I agree. I think it's a great product, and also helps develop those financial habits. My 9-year-old's friend has a GoHenry card, and he's really proud of the fact that he manages to earn his pocket money through it. And again, it's really good educational stuff at the very grassroots. So I totally agree. I mean, Wendy, where else help must be out there for people that are going through problems relating to finance, but also just wider mental health issues? Where should people go? Where should employers be signposting people to go?
A lot of companies use the EAP schemes. There's two things that I think are always a problem for people using the EAP schemes. One is about confidentiality. Clearly, that's never a problem. It's always assured, but people don't see it that way. So they're always very worried about that. Plus, it's very distant. It's very remote. Yep, it's good to have it in places where they can recognise it and see it, so it's on hand when they need it. But I also think the EAP schemes need a bit more humanising. It's a strange person. It's almost too remote, particularly with all the Zoom stuff. People still like face-to-face when they're talking about this sort of stuff, and something particularly about financial pressures. So I think EAP schemes are brilliant, and there are brilliant people who work within the EAP providers. But there's a few problems about the connection with it that could be addressed in different ways. Solutions other than that are GPs, always a good source of help. They'll signpost you into different access areas. They're doing a brilliant job within the NHS about supporting all the extra mental health needs. They're on a training drive. They're doing different things about availability. So that's always a good access point. But for employers, the EAP programs are really good and easily accessible. And then there's no sort of extra financial pressure about finding money to pay for it.
Absolutely. And Lindsay, how crucial is the role of internal comms in all this?
Extremely crucial, especially as we're in a work at home model, and we have been for quite some time. As Wendy says, we have lost that face-to-face. So it's all about transitioning to the work at home, and how do we still keep staff engaged and get the comms out, because it is all now done over Zoom, over Teams, over Skype. So it's more crucial now than it's ever been to keep getting these comms out, to keep the staff engaged, but most importantly, as Wendy says, and emphasising, it is still all very confidential.
Absolutely. It's all, I think, all well and good saying that employers should do more, and that there's a kind of a responsibility to look after their employees in this way. but there's also a financial reality for companies to consider. And obviously COVID's not helped. You know, many companies over the last couple of years have struggled. I mean, Lindsay, from a site's perspective, you know, not just with each person, but how have you managed, you know, have you had to reduce spend in certain areas? It's obviously been tough times. You know, from a company perspective, what can you share?
I think the biggest shift is, you know, the budget's there. It's always there. I think the biggest shift for us has been going from the bricks and mortar model to the work at home. It's still keeping staff, keeping them engaged and supporting them. You know, budgets are signed off years or a year in advance, so we know what we've got, we know what we can play with, we know what we can spend. It's just about moving budget to where it's needed now. And again, I go back to this work at home model.
Okay, that's great. And I mean, Wendy, the work at home model, how, you know, in terms of remote working and loneliness and other related, the stresses of kind of being remote and being on your own and dealing with these pressures, maybe outside of what you're used to from a working perspective, you know, what insight can you shed on that? I mean, how big of a factor is it that people are still adjusting to what has been a huge transition for people for the last couple of years, in particular in certain sectors more than others?
The work at home model is it's like the perfect storm for mental health, and it's twofold. It's the three constructs of happiness are about engagement with people, achievement, and doing things that you enjoy. So straight away you've got two things that are not being measured in the same way as you do in a face-to-face model. So it's huge for people's mental health in terms of the negative impact. I think in terms of moving forwards with that, it's also about the problem of change. As humans, even though we might be people that think we enjoy change, fundamentally as humans, we like routine, we like predictability, we like to feel in control. And so it's the change and the unknown quantity. At the moment, you know, we're all still sort of working on maybe a hybrid model, maybe still at home, but who knows what next week, next month, next year will bring. And it's often the change that's a real struggle for people because they feel out of control of how things are going to be.
And do you think that employers have got a real handle on this in terms of how their employees are actually feeling in terms of that sense of remoteness and the sense of uneasiness around all the change and uncertainty? Do you think they have anyone's measuring this? Is it scientific, or is it just a gut feel that, yeah, you know, we've done a pulse survey and we know that this is a problem, but we don't quite know how big of a problem? Comes back to how open and honest people necessarily may or may not be about, you know, how they feel about these things.
There's a lot of people researching this sort of stuff, but I think from an employer perspective, you know, budgets are tight. These are not sort of things that they're measuring, and I think employees are more reluctant to vocalize this sort of stuff because with the stress, a lot of the work stress, the financial stress and the increase in it is about that uncertainty. It's about the what if scenario. And so they're less likely to vocalize the fact that it's unsettling, that they feel isolated, that they're just not feeling on it and in control of things. So I think it's giving people added pressure not to speak up, not to say anything, you know, just to sort of shut up and put up.
As you said earlier, that drives the downward spiral of coping mechanisms.
Yeah.
So coming back to that financial, you know, we said budgets are tighter, albeit, Lindsay, as you say, budgets are still there. It's not that, you know, money's completely dried up, but employers, you know, especially when times are tough, are having to really quantify the ROI and justify spend on how they spend money. Chris, is there any support still available for companies? Obviously, I know there was lots of grants at the time when the pandemic hit. Is there still, from a financial perspective, stuff that companies could be taking advantage of to help the company themselves alleviate the pressure?
The simple answer is yes, but it's not very well advertised. Hopefully, fingers crossed, we're kind of over the worst of COVID now. But as you say, with COVID kind of passing, a lot of those government grants and subsidies for businesses are kind of going with it. So what we're kind of left with is at a local level, there still is that opportunity, but it's more per location, per borough, and you have to do your research and meet a number of different criteria, but there is still some available if you look hard enough into it.
Okay, interesting. I mean, one thing we did as a part in response to COVID was, we increased the way the platform worked for when an employer buys reward budget through the platform to give to their people. We actually introduced a 10% uplift free of charge, which we gave as partly in response to what was happening. And what was really interesting, and I assumed incorrectly, I assumed that because of the financial pressures company were under, that they would use the 10% uplift in effect to spend 10% less. So they've reduced their budget and therefore benefit from the 10% we gave to keep spending the same amount. We didn't see that at all. We saw that in spite of the financial pressures companies are under, that they took the extra 10% and gave it out to their people, which I thought was a really great message, really, that actually, employers, everyone wants the same thing. Everybody wants to do more as much as they can. So I thought that was a really nice message, and it shows that there is an overarching desire to do good and help. We just had another message in. So the current economic situation is a great opportunity to bring groups together and start conversations and sidestepping feelings of individual guilt and shame. So this, I think, Wendy's best for you. How much do you think group disclosure and group discussion, rather than, like the current EAP model is, I'm in a really difficult place, I'm going to reach out, so I need help, I do personally. Have you got much insight into the group mentality of the, problem shared is a problem halved, or whatever the expression is, but also just that sense that I'm not alone, other people are going through the same problems?
I think the group model's a great thing, but it very much depends on your corporate culture and how that's facilitated. A lot of the drive within the NHS now to support mental health is via groups. And stuff coming out of there is that the drop-off, as in non-attendance, is huge. But people who do go get a lot more than face-to-face therapy from the group because of the group support. So it's a really difficult dynamic. It's about making groups viable and acceptable and encouraging that, because in a lot of areas, they're more effective than face-to-face and one-to-one type of support. So it's how to do that within the workplace.
And you can see the challenge there, any company you can think of, the idea of totally opening yourself up to colleagues and co-workers that you might be rivals with, you might be not friends with. I can see that being a real challenge. I mean, Lindsay, from a Sykes perspective, how realistic do you think that concept is, that, sharing and kind of solutionizing, but as a group in order to help people? Do you think there's any legs to that from a Sykes culture perspective?
Absolutely, Matt. Yeah, and what we found successful is some of our managers actually just do what they call coffee drop-in sessions, where the manager will just open up, whether it's a Zoom call or a Teams call, and anybody can drop in at any time. And it's sent out to so many attendees that you are going to get more than one person. So there is that option to go in as the group. If, to Wendy's point, there's people in the group that you maybe don't want to talk to, you can then set up something individually, but it's opening up those lines of communication and opening up that opportunity to join a call as a group, so that you don't feel, why does Lindsay want to talk to me? Why did that invite only come out to me? It's gone out to the entire team. Oh, well, I will jump on. I've not spoken to Wendy for a while. Maybe I will join today. So that's something that's that we've really, really rolled out, and we call it walk-in management. So you're almost walking the floor on a Zoom call, but you're always still there, available to talk.
I like that. And I think that's a really great initiative. And I think partly the solution here could be about, anonymous ways of doing this as well. Because I think the challenge some people are going to have is that idea of being totally open and honest with people that they're not that close to or whatever. Whether you could use online forums, whether you could use online chats, whether you could use different facilities and technology, I suppose, to to enable that group discussion, but in a private, anonymous way. I mean, Wendy, any examples there that you can think of in terms of people sharing problems, you know, hiding identity, anything there from your perspective?
As I was hearing, I can't remember whether it was yourself or Lindsay talk about forums. I can tell you a lot of research that's gone on with adolescent mental health, and what they found is, particularly in an eating disorders centre for under 18s, they were far more receptive to text messaging. The take-up practically doubled. And I know it's a junior population, but it was really interesting how they were happy to communicate, and they're hoping to roll out the same model within an adult population based on the success of that model with a specific niche. And so I suspect that using the message thing within a group forum could be really useful for people. And I'm sure there's lots of people writing apps as we speak to facilitate that sort of stuff.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think, you know, from our perspective, it is about using the right means to communicate the message to the right audience. So we've seen examples where, you know, e-cards will perform brilliantly. We're extending e-cards to include video, so it's not just image, you know, using text message. So there is, I think, about varying the kind of the medium is key to coming back to it. Land the message, make people aware that there are, you know, there are solutions available, there's educational material available, and obviously just try as many different ways as possible to, you know, to bring people in to find help when they've got the problem. I mean, Chris, and this is probably the least interesting question I'll ask you, but it's something that I know people do want to find out about. When it comes back to the financial pressures companies are under, a lot of companies shy away from reward and recognition because of the tax implications. Some of that is about just shining a light on how it really works and any potential ways to reduce the tax bill to make it more affordable for employers. Not tax, everyone's favorite subject, but I know it's one of your, you know a fair bit about it. Can you talk?
I don't think tax is anyone's favorite subject. Tax is quite grey, so it often depends on the individual business and the employee, etc. But generally speaking, you're able to gift staff up to a value of £50, which is tax free, and you can do that unlimited times throughout the year. The only caveat to that is if it's a director, and then it's capped at 300. I've worked with a number of large companies though who would go down the route of gifting their staff to a higher value, and they take care of the tax on behalf of their workforce. It's through a PSA agreement with HMRC. Okay,
so yeah, I mean, it's one of those areas that I know it's you know, it will put certain employers off, but actually some of these small gestures, relatively small gestures, can mean a lot to people in you know, depending on the situation they're in. So I suppose it's just about making sure that employers are armed with the right information and don't get in trouble with HMRC, which obviously nobody.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I say, up to £50, which a lot of employers will see as a nice gift, as many times as you like throughout the year, is completely tax free.
Yeah, we saw something similar. So we've got in the platform the ability to recognise long service anniversaries and birthdays. Birthdays fell under the trivial benefits free, the tax-free treatment of up to £50. Yeah. So a lot of our employer clients will automate a birthday message going out on people's birthday and up to £50 reward. And it's just that nice touch, really, that on a day that matters, that someone's recognised you and given you something meaningful. And from an employer's perspective, it's tax-free as well. We have some clients as well that will give people's birthdays off as well. So they'll get £50 given to them, and they'll have the day off. So again, it's those, I think, you know, showing you care as an employer and going above and beyond. That's what is the hallmark of a place people really want to work and that people want to stay. We're getting to the point now where, and we'll throw it open to other questions, but I'd like to ask each of the panel to summarize in their own words kind of what you think the key takeaways are for employers at the moment, and some of the key challenges we've touched on, but some of the key solutions and things they need to be thinking about and potentially investing in. Wendy, do you want to kick us off?
I think it's giving people some support around financial stress in particular, making it an open conversation, getting some stuff on board that helps people, not in terms of divulging personal information, but what to do, how to handle it.
Absolutely. It seems like the kind of that confidentiality piece is absolutely paramount.
Yeah.
Okay. Chris, you want to go next?
Just to add to that, I'd probably just say that with financial stress contributing to absence, and that's not to mention if your employees are stressed, that obviously is going to affect their performance. Then just from a financial point of view, for a business, it makes perfect sense to be investing in this area. And although it can be hard to quantify, for sure you're going to see financial benefit that's going to outweigh the investment in this area by looking into things that you can do to improve your employees' financial well-being.
And how much do you see, where's the split, in your opinion, Chris, between investing in the education side and helping people understand their financial position and what's available to them, versus kind of more solution stuff, the sort of things we're doing around, help them save out a salary, give them interest, give them money back on their purchases, that's quite a bit of a blunt instrument. Where do you see the split between the education side and getting people to be in control of their own thinking around the subject versus solution? Is it a hybrid? What do you think?
Before this conversation, I may have actually had a slightly different answer, but listening to Wendy speak, and I completely do get it, how personal finance is very personal, so it may be quite difficult to openly engage and speak to your employees or have that for. I think that's for sure, that's something that employees need to try and do, but it may be a struggle because people don't always want to open up and talk about something that's quite sensitive. So I would say a solutions-based approach would for sure be a good string to have to your bow as an employer.
Yeah, and it sounds like from what you've said earlier around the tax side, that's not really the limiting factor about whether people should do this or not.
No, for sure. Yeah, no, for sure. The tax side, like I say, you can contribute, you can gift up to £50 as many times as you like, which is, from a mental health point of view, is a great way for your employees to feel rewarded. And I think that type of approach as well will help with retention, which again will be a saver for the business.
Absolutely. And I think the financial argument to invest is a strong one on the basis, as you said, absenteeism alone. The cost to companies of people not being at work or people leaving or just their general performance, and people's people impact other people. So if you're not in a great place, you're not going to be positive, impact. You're not going to have a positive impact on your colleagues, etc. So you think that the ROI should be there to demonstrate, but you do hear the question, well, how can I prove that the investment's been worth it? Lindsay, so from Sykes' perspective, how would you round things up?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Wendy. It's hard to get people to talk about stress at any given time, but when it becomes financial stress, it is very, very difficult. However, picking up on what you said, Matt, about reward and recognition, when you do reward or recognise staff, and it has worked, we've seen it work on a couple of occasions, not only are you rewarding them for a job well done, but we'll use the platform as an example, and you reward somebody that £50 pounds worth of ePoints and that Chris says we can do tax-free, you've got no idea what that's done for them financially. So not only do they feel rewarded for doing a good job, but the financial difference that has made to them. And that does, or it can, we have seen a couple of occasions where it's began to open up those conversations. You know, that £50 you gave me, I was able to upgrade my broadband. I was worried about not being able to upgrade it and I would lose my job and that knock-on effect. So it can, it doesn't always, but it can start those conversations, which I think both Wendy and I agree are really, really crucial.
Absolutely. No, and I think a lot of that comes down to timing, right? As you say, it can be the difference in certain scenarios. But I think if you can deliver that message, be it a financial reward, because you've got the budget, you can do it, great, then that can mean the difference. And as you say, it can get people to start talking about money. But also there's loads of research to show it's not just about the financial reward, it is about the recognition. It's about feeling recognized and valued, feeling part of something, you know, linked to the financial side. There's a lot of uncertainty people have got in their heads. You know, if they've got difficulties, they've got self-doubt. We talked about the work at home model. That's been majorly stressful for a lot of people. Some people have taken to it really easily, I'm assuming, Wendy, in terms of the research that's out there.
Yeah, I mean, some people have loved it. Some people it's really played to the strengths, but the people that you find it's played to their strengths are the people that like to avoid anyway. You know, so it's sort of colluded with the way they want to be. So it's not necessarily the healthiest model for them.
No, I've seen that as well. And I think, you know, it's some people have loved it, some people have struggled. And I think the people who've struggled in particular are the ones that if they're going through financial difficulties, they're going to find it really a horrible place to be, because you've lost that human contact that probably would be your outlet historically to talk about problems you've got. You've lost some of the just things you pick up from colleagues when you're interacting face to face that maybe you're not getting remotely. And maybe you felt like you've not been able to talk to somebody because there might be an EAP system they're not aware of. They've never seen it because they don't really use the internet that well, because they're not really into technology. You know, it's a bit of, you know, it goes over their head. So I do think, you know, there is, you know, a lot of work to be done. We talked about the role of internal comms, and we talked about varying the message as much as possible. You know, we have some clients that still do send messages through paper, which again is not, you know, we're an eco platform, it's not what we advocate, but from their perspective it works because they have certain populations that just don't use the intranet and won't respond to a digital message. But I think it is about varying the message, because a combination of email, you know, using the intranet, as Lindsay said, you know, WhatsApp is increasingly popular, WhatsApp for Business. You know, we've recently integrated with Facebook Workplace, which is a, you know, quite a popular business social network. But again, the more, I suppose, the more you can get your tentacles out into different channels that the employees live and breathe, then you're more likely to reach them at the right time. Are there any questions or anything else from the panel before we kind of throw any further questions out that we've not covered that you think people will be interested in hearing? No final messages?
Not from me.
Okay, any other questions from the audience? Or any from Keith? Have you got any?
Matt, I do. Chris said very early on, and Nikki Costa, one of the board members, raised this as well, the whole issue about education. And I'm just curious if there's any research that's been done as to is it one of these situations where you simply cannot start early enough? Or is there a time actually where it's going to be more impactful? For example, Chris mentioned like at university, for example, you know, that's when you're a bit more exposed to managing your own budget, your student grant and all that kind of thing. I was just curious as to, is there actually a sweet spot in terms of profile when it's best to get the education going?
Wendy,
you can maybe answer that more sort of scientific.
From a developmental perspective, you absorb your core belief and value set up until the age of 7. You know, they say, give me the child of 7 and I'll show you the man. So I think it's very much people absorb their financial values from their dominant personalities, usually from parents. And so it's important to teach them those sort of beliefs and that knowledge about finance right from sort of day one practically. And then at a university, you know, help them to practice those beliefs and put those into place.
And I think the suggestion around Go Henry is a really good one, because that's aimed at 5-year-olds to 14-year-olds.
Yeah.
I just got a tour around the secondary school part of, so my 9-year-old, we're looking at schools, secondary school, and they said that one of their classes is financial literacy, to something you said earlier, Chris. And so, you know, the 10-year-old, 11-year-old that's going to be getting that sort of education, which I didn't get when I was younger, and don't imagine any other people got. So Keith, did that help answer the question?
Yes, it did. I just, I can't, you know, I reflect back on my own education and think nobody ever sat me down, and, you know, I was never part of, if you like, it's kind of wrapped up in a broader life education piece. And I've often speculated, particularly now I'm approaching my 60th birthday in a few weeks' time, when would have been the best time to learn certain things. And it just triggered it in my mind when education came up, when Chris mentioned that at the beginning. Thank you.
That's all right. Wendy, that does lead to a bit of a tangential thought, but throw it out there anyway. What role do you see social media having on people's self-perception and I suppose how they portray themselves? Because I think a lot of the problems people face could be lessened if they were more open and shared more openly their actual state of play and where they were at. Because as we've said, there are solutions out there. There are employers that want to help. You know, I know certain clients that we've got that have loaned money to their employees because they know they needed the money. So help is available, but doesn't always get sought. Do you see, is there a correlation between a generation that's maybe more influenced by appearance and how they're perceived than, you know, maybe generation?
Without doubt. I mean, I know from my private practice clients, and we know from a feed about the research, you're working more and more with clients' identity and sense of self. There's more and more perfectionism coming in, and this is all the distortion from social media. And again, this feeds into the whole financial stuff. And when I was looking at some stats to put together, the biggest portion of the population that are affected are younger people in the workplace, because they've got different value and belief systems, and a lot of that is blamed on social media about the perfectionism and the celebrity status stuff. So they're encouraged to spend more than they earn. And of course, they're usually in the lower income bracket, you know, they're building up in terms of their career. And so all these things are pointing to the most financially affected post-COVID are the younger population.
And I imagine it's also coupled with accessibility. You know, nowadays, everything is instantaneous. You know, you can instantly place a bet on a football match or on a race or whatever it might be in the click of click of your fingers. And I think if you go back 10 years, 15 years, it wasn't as easy to be as reckless maybe and impulsive, coupled with, as you say, that perfectionist self-image piece.
And there's also the interface, because everything's online and everything's that little bit more remote. It's not real, is it? It's not parting with cash and pound coins now that were notes. You know, it's different.
It doesn't feel real.
It's not real. It's virtual. It's easy.
Yeah, possibly too easy. And I think that does loop it back nicely to this education point. And I think, Keith, it can't happen soon enough, from early enough in people's lives. And you know, maybe it is partnerships with companies like that. And I think, but it comes back to, from an employer's perspective, what can you do? I think the more education and training and tools and practical tools, as well as theoretical tools, you can empower employees with, that message then gets cascaded down to their children and so on. So I think, there are things that we can do. It isn't about stop social media and prevent, the world that we live in. We live in this amazing world of opportunity for so many people. But I think it comes down to, as an employer, investing in the right things that your employees can help themselves, but also can create the right role model for their children.
Hey, Matt, alas, we are going to need to wrap things up now. That hour just flew by, and I always feel, I've done so many of these, I always feel the content is the driver of the feeling that, time has gone very quickly. Really, really important topic. You guys did a phenomenal job, I felt, putting the case across. So thank you, Matt, Wendy, Chris, and Lindsay. Really appreciate you doing this for us and for your time. I just need to do one quick thing in the final 60 seconds, and that's just to alert everybody to future webinars coming up. We've got 2 in March the 3rd, which is Nudge, Don't Nag, How to Transform Performance, which is going to be delivered by the Black Isle Group. And then the one later in March, on March the 24th, which is Establishing Commercial Credibility for the Next Generation HR Leaders. And that's going to be led by David Chapman and Tony Bainbridge from a company called CEO Whispering. So both of those coming up. You can register for both by going to the LHRC webpage and signing up, which I hope you will do. And once again, Matt and your panelists, thank you so much for leading this webinar for us today. And I wish everyone a very good evening. Thank you for taking the time to join us.
Well, thank you, Keith, and thank you, everyone. Thanks, panelists. Take care.
Cheers, guys.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys.